Hollywood's biggest legends weren't all heroes. Some were cruel, abusive, and feared. These are 20 evil actors of the Golden Age. 1. Errol Flynn. On screen, Errol Flynn was the ultimate hero, sword in hand, saving damsels, and winning hearts. But off the set, Flynn's life was far darker. Nicknamed the Baron of Bad Behavior, he was constantly tangled in scandals. He lived in excess. Alcohol, drugs, and women followed him everywhere. His charm was undeniable, but it also disguised disturbing accusations that haunted his reputation forever. In the 1940s, Flynn was famously put on trial for statutory rape. Though acquitted, the stain never faded. He was also accused of Nazi sympathies during World War II, adding another layer of darkness to his public image. Behind the glitz of Hollywood premieres, Flynn's private life was spiraling into chaos, and those closest to him described him as manipulative, reckless, and cruel. He died at only 50, but his shadowy lifestyle left an unforgettable mark. 2. Wallace Beery. Disney fans may remember Wallace Beery as the lovable voice of Smee and Peter Pan, but those who worked with him told a completely different story. Beery had a reputation as a bully, physically violent, abusive, and arrogant. MGM insiders whispered that he often tormented co-stars, especially younger actors who couldn't defend themselves. Rumors persist that Beery was involved in the mysterious death of fellow actor Ted Healy, creator of The Three Stooges. Witnesses claimed Beery viciously beat Healy the night he died, though MGM worked overtime to bury the story. Colleagues describe Beery as Hollywood's most hated man, someone whose cruelty was hidden behind studio power and family-friendly roles. The shocking contrast between his goofy screen characters and his violent temper off-camera made him one of Hollywood's most sinister figures. Credits. 3. John Wayne. John Wayne, the symbol of rugged American masculinity, wasn't the clean-cut hero fans believed him to be. His on-screen cowboy morals often clashed with his off-screen personality. Wayne was infamous for his violent temper, heavy drinking, and openly racist remarks. His 1971 Playboy interview revealed some of his most shocking views. Comments that painted him as intolerant and arrogant. Co-stars often described him as domineering, dismissive, and aggressive when the cameras weren't rolling. For many, Wayne wasn't a symbol of American strength, but a man deeply stuck in his own anger and prejudice. Hollywood protected his image for decades, but behind the cowboy hat was a man whose personal beliefs and behavior continue to divide opinions. 4. Clark Gable. The king of Hollywood, charmed millions with Gone with the Wind. But Clark Gable's personal life told another story. Known for his ruthless ambition, Gable was willing to betray friends, colleagues, and even lovers to get ahead. His affairs were legendary, but many women later described him as cold, controlling, and cruel. There are even claims that Gable forced himself on actresses during the early years of his career, accusations silenced by the powerful studios. Despite his dazzling smile, Gable's private life was riddled with scandals, illegitimate children, and emotional damage left behind. His death in 1960 left fans heartbroken, but those who truly knew him carried a much darker memory. 5. Spencer Tracy. Spencer Tracy was one of Hollywood's most respected actors, admired for his powerful performances. But behind the polished screen persona was a man consumed by demons. Tracy was a lifelong alcoholic whose rages terrified those around him. He was known to disappear on week-long drinking binges, often returning violent and unstable. Even his longtime relationship with Katharine Hepburn couldn't tame his destructive tendencies. Co-stars described him as unpredictable, capable of brilliance one moment and cruelty the next. Tracy's inner battles with guilt, religion, and addiction made him one of Hollywood's most tortured stars, yet to many who endured his outbursts, he was far more frightening than sympathetic. 6. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney was the golden boy of MGM, funny, charming, and one of the highest-paid actors of the 1940s. But behind the studio's glittering PR machine, whispers painted a much darker picture. Rooney went through 8 marriages, and ex-wives described him as manipulative, unfaithful, and emotionally cruel. He was notorious for chasing younger women, bragging about his conquests, and treating relationships like disposable contracts. On set, co-stars often complained about his arrogance, his inflated ego, and his wild temper. Studio bosses kept cleaning up his messes, paying off scandals before the press could catch on. For many, Rooney wasn't Hollywood's lovable entertainer. He was a predator, protected by power, shielded by fame. The boy-next-door image was a lie, and the truth was far uglier. Egg 7. Peter Lorre. Peter Lorre's creepy roles in M and Casablanca made him Hollywood's go-to sinister figure. But the real Laurie wasn't far from his roles. Behind closed doors, he was addicted to morphine, sinking deeper into paranoia and obsession. Rumors spread through Hollywood about his disturbing fixations. Late-night parties filled with drugs, strange behavior, and cruel manipulations. He was said to delight in unsettling those around him, using his chilling voice to intimidate colleagues off camera. Though fans adored his villainous charm, insiders whispered that the screen didn't reveal the half of it. Laurie's addictions consumed him, turning him into the very monster he so often played. By the end, the line between his performances and reality was frighteningly thin. 8. George Reeves. George Reeves became a national hero as Superman, the ultimate symbol of justice and goodness. But his private life was no fairy tale. Reeves was haunted by anger, depression, and a toxic love affair with the wife of a powerful Hollywood executive. He grew bitter as his career stalled, drinking heavily and lashing out at those close to him. Then came the shocking end. In 1959, Reeves was found dead from a gunshot wound. Officially ruled a suicide, but Hollywood insiders have whispered for decades. Was it murder? Many believed the studio, terrified of scandal, buried the truth. To his fans, Reeves was Superman. To those who knew him, he was a broken man, trapped in a role he couldn't escape, living in a world darker than any villain he faced on screen. 9. Oliver Reed. Though slightly past the golden age, Oliver Reed carried Hollywood's darkest reputation into the spotlight. Known for his intense performances, he was just as terrifying off-screen. Reed drank like no one else. His legendary binges often ended in violence. He picked fights in bars, harassed women, and even assaulted co-stars. Crew members described him as unpredictable, a ticking time bomb whose presence brought dread to the set. Stories circulated of drunken rampages where Reed smashed glasses, destroyed furniture, and left trails of fear behind him. To the public, he was a wild character. But for those forced to work with him, he was nothing short of dangerous. His legend lives on not as a brilliant actor, but as one of Hollywood's true terrors. 10. Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum's cool, tough guy image made him one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. But beneath the charm was a rebel with no conscience. Arrested for marijuana possession in 1948, Mitchum brushed it off like a joke, but his off-screen life was anything but funny. He was cruel in his relationships, known for heavy drinking, violent outbursts, and callous treatment of those who loved him. Studio executives quietly silenced his worst scandals to protect their investment, but whispers of his behavior never went away. To fans, Mitchum was the perfect bad boy. To Hollywood insiders, he was a ruthless, self-destructive figure who left scars wherever he went. 11. Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas was a titan of Hollywood, rugged, handsome, and larger than life. But away from the spotlight, stories of his predatory behavior followed him like a shadow. Rumors swirled for decades that Douglas used his power to prey on young women, and in recent years disturbing allegations resurfaced, with many believing he was responsible for one of the most infamous assaults in Hollywood history. Insiders whispered that the studios knew but chose silence over scandal, shielding their golden boy at any cost. On screen, Douglas played heroes. Off-screen, he was feared, not adored. Even as he grew old and Hollywood celebrated him as a legend, whispers of his cruelty and abuse lingered, leaving a permanent stain on his once glittering reputation. 12. Fatty Arbuckle. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle was once one of the biggest stars of the silent era, earning millions and adored worldwide. But in 1921, his career was destroyed in one of Hollywood's first great scandals. Arbuckle was accused of the brutal assault and death of actress Virginia Rupp during a wild party. Though he was acquitted after 3 trials, his reputation was shattered. Studios banned his films and audiences turned away in disgust. Many still believe he got away with murder. Behind the slapstick comedy was a man who indulged in excess, whose private life was drenched in alcohol, debauchery, and shocking behavior. Arbuckle's story proved that even in Hollywood's earliest years, evil could hide behind a smile. 13. Bela Lugosi. Bela Lugosi terrified audiences as Dracula, but his real-life demons were just as chilling. He became hopelessly addicted to morphine, his once elegant charm corroded by years of abuse. Colleagues whispered of his violent rages and mood swings, claiming he was impossible to work with. He was said to have treated women cruelly, moving from marriage to marriage, leaving behind broken hearts and bitter memories. Hollywood tolerated his darkness for as long as Dracula sold tickets, but when the roles dried up, Lugosi was left with nothing but his addictions. By the end, he was a tragic figure, buried in his Dracula cape, a final eerie reminder of how the monster had consumed the man. 14. Lon Chaney Jr. Lon Chaney Jr. inherited his father's fame but not his discipline. Known as the Wolf Man, he became one of Universal's horror legends. Yet his private life was filled with alcohol, violence, and rage. Chaney was notorious for drunk outbursts, often lashing out at those closest to him. Friends whispered that he destroyed every relationship he touched, unable to escape his own bitterness. He once admitted he hated being trapped in horror films, yet he depended on them to survive. That frustration turned into cruelty, making him feared on set and at home. For fans, he was the tragic Wolfman. For insiders, he was far scarier when the cameras stopped rolling. 15. Richard Burton. Richard Burton's booming voice and magnetic presence made him unforgettable on stage and screen. But privately, he was a man consumed by alcohol and violence. His marriage to Elizabeth Taylor became legendary, not for romance, but for the fights, the screaming, and the destruction left in their wake. Burton drank endlessly, his binges leading to physical and emotional outbursts that terrified those around him. He was brilliant, yes, but also cruel, tearing down colleagues, humiliating friends, and destroying himself in the process. Hollywood celebrated his talent, but behind closed doors, many whispered that Burton wasn't just a tragic figure, he was a dangerous one. 16. Laurence Olivier. Laurence Olivier is remembered as one of the greatest actors to ever live, a knighted genius, Shakespeare's modern voice. But beneath that polished exterior was a cruel and arrogant man. Colleagues whispered that Olivier thrived on humiliating others. He belittled co-stars, mocked younger actors, and emotionally tormented his wives. He was ruthless in love, particularly toward Vivien Leigh, who suffered from mental illness. Instead of compassion, Olivier often treated her with cold detachment, even cruelty, while the world saw them as a golden couple. Many who worked with him described him as brilliant but monstrous, a man whose genius on stage was matched only by the darkness of his private behavior. 17. Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando reinvented acting, but he also reinvented cruelty. Charismatic and magnetic on screen, Brando off-camera was manipulative, selfish, and destructive. He treated women as disposable, bragging about conquests, leaving behind broken families and pain. Co-stars complained of his arrogance. He would deliberately sabotage scenes, taunt directors, and humiliate fellow actors. The most chilling whispers were about his private life, allegations of abuse, predatory behavior, and reckless cruelty that studios hushed up. Even his children described him as distant and damaging, a father whose fame was a curse. Hollywood celebrated Brando as a genius, but to many who actually knew him, he was nothing less than a monster in disguise. 18. Charles Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin, the beloved little tramp, brought laughter to millions. Yet his private life was filled with disturbing secrets. Chaplin was infamous for his obsession with very young women, often teenagers, whom he seduced, manipulated, and discarded. His marriages were surrounded by scandal, his affairs whispered about in courtrooms and gossip columns. Studios and lawyers worked tirelessly to protect him, but the truth was too ugly to hide completely. Chaplin also wielded his power ruthlessly, crushing rivals and exploiting his fame. The contrast between his innocent on-screen persona and his predatory personal life was one of Hollywood's biggest hypocrisies. He was a genius of comedy, but behind the smile lurked behavior many would call evil. 19. Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis was adored as one half of the legendary comedy duo with Dean Martin, and later as a solo comic genius. But offstage, Lewis was anything but lovable. He was arrogant, egotistical, and cruel to those closest to him. His ex-wives described years of emotional abuse, while co-stars spoke of his controlling, manipulative nature. He humiliated colleagues, exploded in rages, and treated women as beneath him. Behind the laughter was a man with a dark, bitter core. Even as audiences cheered his slapstick humor, insiders whispered that working with him was a nightmare. To Hollywood, Lewis was comedy royalty. To those who knew the real man, he was far from funny. 20. Orson Welles. Orson Welles, the boy genius of Citizen Kane, was hailed as a revolutionary filmmaker. But with brilliance came arrogance of staggering proportions. Welles was known for his monstrous ego, demanding total control, betraying colleagues, and discarding friends once they outlived their usefulness. He manipulated women, cheated relentlessly, and left a trail of broken relationships. Crew members complained of his cruelty on set, his habit of mocking and humiliating those beneath him. Hollywood both worshipped and feared him, for his genius was undeniable, but his behavior was intolerable. To the public, Welles was an artist. To insiders, he was a tyrant, whose appetite for power was as destructive as it was legendary.